now a lot of people watching the program, like me, I'm sure, have been saying to themselves, this is the biggest obstacle is, what are we ever going to be able to do about the military? And then in the last couple of weeks, all of a sudden I met Al Frenzel. Al Frenzel is a retired full colonel in the U.S. Army who has been spending an awful lot of time working on this program as a member of the military. And so I'd like to introduce to us the audience, Al Frenzel, and have Al kind of give us a little bit more background about what you've been doing in the military on this topic, and move on.
Right, well, thanks, Kioni, for having me here. I was served 27 years, but the later part of my career was served at the Army War College. I attended as a student, wrote a research paper on downsizing the military based on the National Military Strategy. I recommended at the time about a 50% cut, basically trying to get a bigger piece of the peace dividend that we should have taken, but unfortunately the Iraq War got in the way. But I was fortunate enough to stay on as faculty, and I was in the department that actually teaches this issue, and I was the lesson author and the exercise director for an exercise that allowed the students to design their own military force structure based on some financial constraints. So in this particular area, I do have some interest, a lot of interest, and some credibility. And what I want to tell the listeners is we have an excellent opportunity, once-in-a-century opportunity here, based on what Department of Defense has to do to its force structuring, based on the recent issue of the Quadrennial Defense Review. So about 5 weeks ago, the Army announced that it's been directed to cut its forces from about 550,000 to as low as 420,000 personnel. That's a big chunk. That's 130,000 soldiers throughout the world, but actually 19 states have been identified to absorb these cuts. And Hawaii, believe it or not, is on that list. I'm not sure it would have been on this list if Senator Inouye was still with us, but we're on it now, and I think it's a great opportunity. And it's a big cut proposed, 16,000 for Schofield Barracks and 3,800 soldiers for Fort Shafter. Now, what I'd like to do is have Hawaii embrace that opportunity and accept those cuts. All the other 18 states are going to fight like hell to keep those soldiers. And I think Senator Inouye and Senator Akaka would have fought like hell to keep them. But we have new leadership now, not as powerful, probably more open-minded, and if we embrace those cuts, we actually, in my analysis, could move the residual soldiers that are stationed at Schofield. In fact, I can even argue for deeper cuts, because once we lose the two maneuver brigades, we don't need the support forces that the study leaves behind. So I could argue for more cuts, but nevertheless, we move the residual from Schofield and Wheeler to Fort Shafter, where it's losing cuts, and they would be able to accommodate that. And guess what that gives the state of Hawaii, or the Hawaiian nation, the opportunity to take Schofield Barracks, Wheeler Army Airfield, Makua Valley, Dillingham, a military reservation, and I'm suggesting Kolikoli Pass access, so we have unrestricted and unimpeded access through Kolikoli Road and through Lululele Naval Weapons Station. So, an absolutely amazing opportunity to get, and this is not like Barber's Point, where Barber's Point was the Navy knew for 15 years it was going to lose that facility, so they put no money into it, and it was dilapidated, and when the state took it over, it really didn't receive much. But in regards to the facilities that I just mentioned, huge amount of resources, industrial buildings, family housing, individual housing, hospitals, post office, schools, library, basically a full city that the state of Hawaii would inherit. And just imagine with, there's 38,000 family members that live on Schofield alone. Imagine being able to take beneficiaries off the DHHL waiting list and give them a house, or make some long-term low lease agreement. Imagine taking the homeless from off of our areas and giving them housing. Imagine, and I'm driving into work, or to the show today from Makaha. You know, the West Oahu area there off the highway that is gone nowhere for 15, 20 years. Imagine UH Central Oahu. There are facilities that UH could move into in Schofield Barracks with library already established, education center, and outbuildings for classrooms. Wonderful facilities, all brand new. And imagine the access that the Oahu would have, you know, from all directions, including the leeward coast over Kolikoli Pass. So that's just one idea that, you know, of 100 different advantages that Hawaii would gain from taking those properties. I value, to give a value for those installations and all their resources, over $100 billion. Let me say that again. $100 billion worth of value.
Wow. You know, it's just a stunning idea. The fact that there are 38,000 people living there, and
families.
It's 38,000 families, is that what you said?
Well, soldiers and family members.
Okay.
And I think that's a low number because they're basing it on homes, single family homes of 2,861, but there's actually 7,000 homes all over Oahu. So I think the study is withholding some assets that I haven't been able, you know, I haven't had the time to dig into, but it's readily available. But I actually think there's more opportunity for family housing, for housing for families, and the number of barrack spaces is much more. And when we talk barrack spaces, we're talking bathrooms and rooms and centrally available facilities that are much better than a homeless would get in a small little rundown condo if the mayor ever has his Housing First program.
All right, tell me, so you're a private first class and you moved to Schofield Barracks. What is your living situation?
Nowadays, things have evolved a long ways from the old open barracks that we saw on TV with the Gomer Pyle show. They now have at most 2 men in a room, but often it's single family rooms with a adjacent bathroom, and it's large spaces. You know, they probably average soldier PFC probably has 400 square feet of space, and furnishing.
Wow.
And all that would be available for us to acquire. There's the negative aspect, which I hate to argue against this proposal, but there are a couple negatives. But when Fort Ord, California downsized the 7th Infantry Division, or actually, did away with it, the Monterey community acquired the Fort Ord property, and I have anecdotal comments about how much that improved the Monterey area, both in value of properties and facilities and access to beaches. And so originally they fought it like hell, which I hope Hawaii doesn't do with this opportunity. But they fought it like hell, they lost, and as a result, they benefited.
You know, years ago, Poka and I, years and years ago, Poka and I, my wife, took a trip to Washington. Where was that we went?
Yeah, that's right, on base closures in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Yes, about 20 years ago, and earlier generation, of course, right?
But, at that time, the big thing was we were going to close Barbers Point, and people were really nervous about it because it was going to be a disaster. Well, Barbers Point was a disaster. It's gone nowhere, but that's because the military held on to it. So I followed up on that a bit as time went on, and I found that Barbers Point is really the anomaly, though. It's the real one that stands out, and not the real one, but the very, very few that stand out as a problem. all the rest have been tremendous economic successes. And the big thing is, you got to get the military to let go entirely. And what happened with Roberts Point was, they're still holding on to it all these years later. And so, you know, if the military does let go entirely, then it every base that closes, it turns into be just a tremendous economic boom for the area where it's located.
You're absolutely right, but you'll have some businessmen and some old-timers that are concerned about losing the military that will argue economics and argue strategic value. And I like to talk about strategic value because that's been a misnomer since World War II. You know, there's a legacy force at Schofield from World War II that grew in size because of Senator Inouye's ability to bring pork into Hawaii. But the two maneuver brigades that are up there now that can't deploy anywhere. They have no ships. If the cargo ships are needed for their equipment, those have to come from the West Coast, and they have no cargo aircraft. There's eight aircraft on Hickam, of which 2 may be on station at any one time. These are flying missions all over the country, and it takes about 300 flights to move one of the maneuver brigades. So it's an incredible logistic nightmare. It's called the tyranny of distance in the Pacific, to have the Army go anywhere and respond. So that it's a misnomer that they're strategic. In my opinion, they're isolated. And we have a force that can do the mission that they're pretending they can do, and that's the Marines in Kaneohe. Kaneohe has forced entry capability, which the Army doesn't have. The Army has to go to a benign environment, equip itself, and maneuver to the fight. But the Marines can move right in with their amphibious capability and take action right away. And they have their own ships, they have their own aircraft. That's the force that is strategic, both here in Kaneohe and also in Okinawa. But the Army, taxpayers can't afford to have 2 services doing the job that one's already doing. And so this is not only great for Hawaii, it's the right thing to do for the United States, it's the right thing to do for the taxpayers.
I think what you're saying about the fact that they're isolated and that they really can't move directly into war.
And they can't even train. With the striker brigades, there's nowhere to train. Out in Pakaloa, but it's expensive to move them. They've got to contract a ship to come here, move and deploy it. You know, the distance doesn't mean anything in cost. It's just the fact they have to get a ship and load it up and debark it, and the cost is tremendous. So it's ridiculous to have an isolated maneuver units here with no place to train. And calling Makua Valley as a place to train is just, frankly, it's a lie. There's no way a brigade can operate in that. And with the mechanized equipment of today, Makua Valley's too small, way too small. Even for company level operations, the ability to operate over long distances with the weapon systems the Army has today, Makua Valley is just a small little fraction of what they need. So the Army, I think, is trying to fool itself or fool the community that it's essential to their readiness.
What about Pohakuloa? Is it possible that they would close that too?
I'm not, anything's available to the community, but that one I'm leaving off the table for mainly the Hawaii National Guard. They need a place to train, they need a place to deploy to. I've left off Kahuku, I've left off the East Range, which is near the Waihiwa area, and Pakuloa. And I don't know why I keep pronouncing that. The PTA, I've always called it PTA my whole life, but that obviously could be available, but it takes away a training area from the Hawaii National Guard. Now, if they come online and say they can do without that, then that's a no-brainer. But what I'm trying to do, I do need to try to encourage, participation in a movement on this subject is I'm organizing what I call the Oahu Council for Army Downsizing, and I'm trying to get like-minded organizations to join this council so that we can not only spread the word, but can coalesce into a group that can communicate the goodness of this idea to our political leaders and to any opposition that may come up. So far, there's no opposition because this issue is very quiet. I think the only one speaking about this issue right now is me. And I like that because I can, and with the people that help me, can form the argument and not get into the old conventional mode, which is, oh my God, we can't lose these troops, it's too critical. I talked with it as an example of how defensive people can be on this issue. We had a hearing from Makua Valley out in Waianae last week, and there was a member from the VFW that came out to speak, and after the meeting I asked him to come to the side and talk to him about this idea, and I thought he was going to hit me with his cane. You know, he just could not comprehend the ability, the flexibility enough to move into a different era than World War II.
Can I sort of change, just a slight change in the approach? And that is, you mentioned the Hawaii National Guard from an independence approach of Hawaii. What is your estimation with regards to not being an aggressive force or an assertive or an offensive force, but merely as a defensive force to be able to protect Hawaii from any outside aggression in Hawaii? What is the potential for the Hawaii National Guard at its present state or in a state after the U.S. leaves Hawaii to be able to at least provide a defensive force to protect Hawaii?
Well, you know, quite frankly, I can't justify even the Hawaii National Guard being on Oahu or the other islands. I don't think that Hawaii is vulnerable to invasions. You know, the world works as economic partnerships and social partnerships, and I think the only invaders that you really point to right now is the United States. So I don't see you know, the old paradigm of you know, people attacking Hawaii for its resources. So I extend and say we just need internal protection.
Sometimes what the discussion moves to as an independent nation and the national security of the independent nation is not so heavy in terms of military, but only for what we call defense, just to protect it from the possibility of invasion. But three other factors in the defensive policy is self-sufficiency, is outward usefulness, to have Hawaii being useful to the world, and the third would be non-alliance, so that we don't enter into any pact, that if you get attacked, we'll come and join you, or if you want to attack another country, we'll promise to be part of your force. Non-alliance, and built around those four factors, this is a defensive approach, or this is the national security approach, rather than what U.S. normally has, is essentially an offensive force.
And the force you speak to, which wouldn't be that large, would give an opportunity for training and leadership and followership abilities to our youth. But more importantly, it would provide a reactionary force for civil defense type responses. I think that's necessary to have a element that can go anywhere throughout Oahu or the other islands and help in disasters.
You know, before we go any further, I want to come back to the Council for the Oahu Council for Army Downsizing. Yes, okay. And I'd like you to tell the audience how can everybody get in touch with you, and how how can people begin to come together? And have you had any other groups come together so far?
This is only about a week old in my efforts, and the audience can go for more information. Go to oc4ad.com, and if you didn't get that, just play it back. Just rewind and play it back. But so far, you know, in this process, a lot of, when I present it to members of the boards, they've got to go to their board meetings and they've got to decide and get consensus that they want to participate. So it could be a slow process, but so far the Aha Moku Council and the Kingdom of Polynesian Kingdom of Tui. Like I say, others have been invited, and their board of directors are deciding. I even sent an email yesterday to Dr. Crabb. I don't know if, being a pseudo-government agency, whether or not they can actually do that, but I'd love to have big influential groups and organizations like them to be a part of the membership. But I'm available via oc4ad.com. There's also a video on the same subject and the links to the 2 documents that actually came out in late June and are driving this discussion right now.
Okay. You know, I really think it's important that we try to get groups to support you too. And I just want to repeat that again, oc4ad.com.
Thank you.
Okay. You know, another thought that occurred to me too, and I want to bring Leon into the discussion here in a minute, but you mentioned 38,000 houses or 38,000 individuals?
38,000 family members.
Family members.
And single soldiers.
Okay.
Occupying about 3,000 houses and about 7,000 individual barrack spaces.
Okay.
That's on Schofield, but they have housing in other areas throughout the community, and I don't believe they counted that in their study. So, because a total of, if you read the documents that the Army published, a total of 49,000 family members and soldiers are affected by these cuts, as well as civilian workers. But if you add the numbers a different way, that I don't think they did, it's actually 70,000. So at least half of those, more than half, are in virtually brand new housing. You've seen all the construction.
Yeah, so much new construction in the last years.
And in fact, for the contractors that are worried about losing, contractor jobs and work, the construction boom is over. On the military, particularly the Army bases. There's no other big money coming in. The facilities have been built or renovated. The end of the road is there.
You know, the homes that have been built, they're not substandard. I mean, they are really good houses. You know, I mean, there's everything there that a person would want. I mean, what a boon that would be to our community. Another thought that comes to me too is the divide between the rich and the poor. You know, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Right now, what we're seeing in Hawaii is we're building for rich people to come and buy. You know, and our people can't afford the housing. I mean, what would this do to housing prices?
Well, the real estate folks will be unhappy, but you know, when we lose 50 to 70,000 from the population, a third of which are living and either own or rent on the economy or off base, as I would say, the rents and prices are good, especially if the 500, 700,000 or 500,000 and below houses, the prices are going to go down. Oh my God, isn't that a terrible thing?
Isn't that a terrible thing?
So for individual, I'm an individual owner. I don't care what the value of my property is, and if it goes down, so be it. But
it's affected the quarters allowance that the military has been paying. Every time they increase the quarters allowance, rent goes up. Because everyone is trying to get into that market, but what about the low-income folks or the homeless? It makes it even more difficult.
If I was on active duty right now, in addition to my normal pay, I would be given about $3,500 extra to rent or buy a home. So that's going to drive up prices. But when we lose it, now in one part of the study, They talk about, oh, well, the impact of this would do on unemployment in Hawaii. Well, that's a falsity, because these people are going to go back to the mainland. They're going to either be reassigned to other installations, or they're going to be cut from the service. So they're not going to enter. Maybe 1% will decide to stay in Hawaii, like I did.
I think the general idea is that a transit population is not as valuable as a permanent population. And the military, that military that we talked about, are really transit population. They're not permanent in terms of being in Wahiawa or being in other communities. So in the long run, it'll be actually more profitable for the community when you have permanent people dedicated to the well-being of the community.
And they're paying, they aren't paying state taxes, but yet they're benefiting from our roads, they're benefiting police services, and all those services that the city and county and the state provide. So look at our traffic alone. Imagine 5% of the population, no longer on the roads, or on our beaches, or is it City Hall in line?
Oftentimes they look at contribution to education, federal contribution to education, and they brag about about $4,000 or $5,000 per child that the feds pay to educate a child in Hawaii per year. And when you look at the numbers, it costs maybe $7,000 to $8,000 to educate a child. So even there, 10,000. So even there, the feds are not paying their fair share. So some serious review of those numbers would also help to convince people that it's not really a bad deal. It's even on the economic equation, it's not really a bad deal.
I just wanted to mention also, I think that some people you have to get involved is the churches. I think that there's people recognize the problem of homelessness. People recognize the problem of the difficulty renting. Just the article in the paper today or yesterday, we have such great social problems. Catholic Charities is another group that might get really behind you. And you begin to start to think of the people who are really concerned about the issues that you're talking about. There are major organizations and huge bunches of people who are, I think extremely supportive of what you're talking about.
I agree, and I'm going to do that, but I want to jump on that as fast as I can. Right now, we're very small in numbers, but I'm going to take any organization that can see the goodness of this.
Okay.
This brings us around to where we started from, which was one, the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists. So the Hawaiian Kingdom is a neutral country which does not accept a foreign army on its own grounds. So this is something that is something that we need to work toward. That is not just downsizing, but eventually removing the military from Hawaii. The other thing is that the Pentagon has been studying this for years, and they do have contingency plans in place if they are asked to have to vacate Hawaii. And so those plans are already in place, and I already know that because I've talked to some people who have indicated such. So, and then the other thing is that decolonization. Well, we started out talking about decolonization, and this is part of it. The colonization of a nation, a military is a large colonization force. That is, it sets up not just itself, but it sets up a whole way of thinking about us being subservient because this military is here, and then we become dependent on it because economically they contribute so much to the economy and to our welfare and all these types of things. But we have to start weaning ourselves of this dependency on outside sources coming in, particularly if they're actually in the long run damaging to us. I mean, they're not setting us free. They're actually enslaving us even more. And so the whole process of decolonization is getting rid of these kinds of mechanisms that continue to injure us and continue to harm us and continue to keep us down. So the idea is that we need to start decolonizing, not just from a political standpoint, but the way we think, the way that we look at the things around us. When we say that the military is always going to be here, they'll never leave, that's really a colonized type of concept that we need to get rid of. One simple thing, and this is going to be my own personal campaign, I want to get rid of our usage of the word mainland, because I think that this will help to reset our minds a little bit more, to the point where we're saying we're not now identifying ourselves as subject to another country, but that is not our mainland. We are ourselves, and we don't call that the mainland. If we could stop using that term, it would actually start to trigger our way of thinking into thinking of ourselves as independent.
I called the Office of Hawaiian Affairs the other day and was told that one of the trustees was on the continent.
Yeah, so, good, all right.
You know, people are getting the message. Yes, let's go.
Or a quick point. It's like the timing is coming to critical mass on a lot of issues, you know, with the Department of the Interior here and now this opportunity with Department of Defense. But I would like to make the point is if Hawaii doesn't embrace these cuts this time and we don't lose these soldiers, there's not going to be another cut in my lifetime.
Would you say that one more time, please, just so that we really get that strongly?
This is a once-in-a-century opportunity. If the forces aren't cut as the DoD wants for the island of Oahu, in the amount of 16,000 at Schofield and 3,800 in Shafter, with all of their family members and entourage, we will never have this opportunity again. This is
unless the Hawaiian Kingdom goes back.
But I agree. That's always given.
Yeah.
But if not, and in the meantime, once the Army cuts, and if we had, let's say, Senator Inouye get in the way of this, and we keep those troops, and the Army downsizes in the other 18 states that are vulnerable, the Army I don't foresee them going below 420,000 in our lifetimes.
And how much time do we have to affect this? What is the timeline?
Well, the DoD, even though they wrote what they have to do based on guidance from the, in what's called the National Military Strategy, even though they had to write what they have to implement, they're already saying that they can't live with force cuts of this magnitude. So there'll be some delays, and the states are going to, the other 18 states are going to try to delay, and try and pretend this isn't happening. Extend it, hoping a conflict comes along and changes everybody's mind, and hopefully not create a conflict just to do it. You know, the military-industrial complex at its best. But
and then we were talking about the timeline.
But the Quadrennial Defense Review for 2014 basically implies by FY16 that these cuts need to start, but by 2020 that they be a done deal, and that means not only just the cuts, but also the bases that are affected by those cuts being turned over. That's a long process, so the military has to actually operate in the near term for this to happen. So this could happen within the very foreseeable future, especially if Hawaii embraces it.
And so how do we? How much time do we have to embrace, is what I'm saying, and to what degree?
Well, part of the Oahu Council for Army Downsizing is to set the conditions for this message throughout the community, so everyone understands the goodness of it. If we can get our message out, as I'm trying, into the public before the opposition message gets out, and it hasn't yet. Then this thing will go and it'll create a life of its own and be unstoppable.
From the Hawaiian sovereignty perspective, maybe we can encourage these other 18 states to take the rest of the military. So they won't fight about it, and they'll be in support of the removal.
Well, I mentioned earlier the 16 and the 3,800s. I think all the soldiers at Schofield, virtually all, wouldn't be needed. So the cuts could actually, other than the 2 maneuver brigades, which they named they named specifically, they only did percentage cuts for the support troops. It was arbitrary percentage cuts. If you look, you do more thorough analysis, most of those support troops aren't needed. So the cuts could be higher.
Earlier, we were talking about, not earlier, but before the program began, we were talking about Pearl Harbor and the way that Hawaii really was taken over by the United States in order to get Pearl Harbor. And either you or Leon was saying that, that there were plans some time back to actually give up Pearl Harbor.
To close Pearl Harbor.
Is that right?
Yes. That was a recommendation about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, by one of the studies again. And that was the recommendation. Pearl Harbor was one of, I think, 5 major bases around the United States to be closed. And Senator Inouye, of course, quickly went into action and stopped that silliness.
We're glad he did.
The community should understand that the services don't decide where they go. Congressmen and senators decide. And
independent nations.
Good. Well, we certainly want to thank you all for participating today. My co-host, Makaha, and Leon. Good to have you again, as
Thank
usual.
you.
Okay. And Al Frenzel.
It was a pleasure.
Al Frenzel again is Colonel Al Frenzel, and is the Council of Army Downsizing, the Oahu Council for Army Downsizing, and it is oc4ad.com.
Yes, it is.
And folks, what we're talking about again is transitioning to the new government. This is Dr. Kioni Dudley for the Sovereignty Conversation Community Forums. This is program number 8. We hope to have you with us for program number 9, 10, 11, and 12. Aloha.
It's a song that was written